everyone. I'm Evelyn Jerome Alexander with Magellan College Counseling. I'm based in Los Angeles, and we have a team of fabulous counselors all across the country who help students organize their college search and application process. And I'm thrilled today to welcome Melissa Falk, who is the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Really quick before we start, let me just say next week, I will be interviewing Casey Rowley, who is you know Casey, Melissa, guess? Mm-hmm. She's the college counselor at Beverly Hills High School. Before that, she was the college counselor at Malibu High School. She's awesome. She's a rock star in the college counseling community. And the week after that, I'll be interviewing Kuka Acosta from UC Santa Barbara, and Phil Moreno from Dickinson College, another liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and my colleague Diana Hansen, and we are going to talk about essays and question responses, because the UCs don't want you to write essays, they want you to write question responses. So the four of us are going to talk about how students can present themselves well through these writing exercises. And Melissa, we may end up talking about that a little bit, but sort of the featured topic is really how is college admissions going to change this year? And you and I were just talking about your top priority, which is really getting your students onto campus this fall. So talk to us for a moment about what you think that's going to look like.
Yeah. So we have not unveiled our official plan. It's not been confirmed yet for the fall. It is multiple weeks in the making with many, many parties on campus, faculty, staff, lots of different divisions, with the core focus being obviously health and safety and well-being of our students, but also really wanting to make sure that this the highest level educational experience simultaneously. So we are hopefully, and very hopeful, our goal and our fondest wish is to actually be on campus together as a residential college. It's something that's very important to us for lots of different reasons, but particularly because of the community aspect and the ability just to be connected, literally, in terms of whether it's in academic work and class conversations, whether it's with leadership, whether it's with athletics. And so those are things that are, certainly on our mind right now. Goal is to announce formal plans by July 1st, but hopefully sooner. But really thinking about sort of what does that mean, particularly to residential college, where students are very accustomed to sharing small space together in large crowds oftentimes. And that's not even the classroom. I was referring, Evelyn and I were talking about the fact that, and Evelyn's been on campus, we've got this big, beautiful dining hall, and we have multiple places that people eat on campus. And part of community for Muhlenberg, we like our food, congregate not only over sustenance in terms of meals, social connections that are made over sharing meals, breaking bread. So a lot of that is pretty complicated. Many people are dedicating hours and time and heart into trying to figure out how to make that all work for this fall. And so our plan is to be on campus for the fall, but it's not official yet. And so we're hoping to hear certainly more in the coming days, literally at this point.
Days, fabulous. So this is actually a really good opportunity for me to let you just talk for a moment about Muhlenberg College and what's the character like and what makes it different. And for you, the challenge at this point is really to present a very, very personal college in what has become kind of an impersonal way.
Yeah. Well, they always say in times of chaos, right? Innovation comes out of chaos. So it's really challenged us quickly to sort of really remain focused on who we are, the essence of who we are, the heart and soul of the experience, and really ask ourselves the questions about how to convey that to prospective students, right? Not only in terms of applicants this past spring, but as we approach this upcoming next academic year, how do we convey that in a way that's authentic, it's real, and it's true? I mean, that's really important to us. And so Muhlenberg is, we are a liberal arts college of about 2,200 students. I think one of the briefest way for me to describe what it feels like to be on campus is one of the traditions at Muhlenberg that's this unspoken rule, and we almost make fun of ourselves about it to some degree, is the fact that every door on campus happens to be red. And so one of the interesting pieces is there's a door holding tradition at the college that has gone on for, I don't even know how long, but there's just this this innate sense of responsibility that people feel for one another, and kindness, decency, goodness. And so what that translates to in a very sort of subtle but understood way among the community is that if you're walking into a building and someone's walking behind you, which they typically are, that you pause for a minute, you make sure the door doesn't shut in that person's face. And it's just this very simple thing that you can do in a matter of moments, but it translates to sort of the continuum of community in lots of ways, in the way that people actually care and actually act like they care about one another in the course of everyday life, even when things are busy and stressful and bustling the way lots of college campuses are. So, but we're a place really that takes a lot of pride in the fact that we treat each other with decency, respect, and that even on a bad day, that door is always going to be held open, and that can really change the trajectory of things for a lot of folks. So.
Yeah, and then academically, you know, when I think of Muhlenberg, I think neuroscience, I think art, you know, which most people think couldn't be good on the same campus, but I think of those.
Yeah, no, and actually we're one of those unique liberal arts colleges where the cross-discipline piece, there are great strengths across divisions. Very strong history in terms of placing students onto med school, veterinary medical school, dental school, all the health professions related graduate programs, like decades, like I shouldn't say decades, 150 plus years at this point in terms of really placement in that arena. It's a very strong sciences, yes. Neuroscience, biochemistry, biology, physical science, et cetera. Interestingly, about 3 decades ago, a very innovative and very bold theater teacher actually decided that Muhlenberg, the way we did pre-med, why can't we do that for theater arts? And so Muhlenberg actually has a nationally ranked theater arts program, which is a Bachelor of Arts program, but has garnered incredible strength. And actually, I say it's nationally ranked, but it's internationally recognized. So we draw an international applicant pool specifically for our theater arts program. So, and lots of cross-discipline majoring going on. So theater and physics and science and dance. Yeah, so really, we've got a very, very widely, broadly interested group of students, and they can pursue their passions on the same campus at the same high level across academic departments.
What is that international student body? What happens to that this year? How will that change?
Sure. Well, it doesn't, again, core values in terms of how we treat one another hasn't changed. So we actually have we have about 3 dozen students still on campus, most of whom are international. A number of students were able to get home or able to have connections within the US and were able to get off campus and stay home, but those who were not, Muhlenberg is still their home. And so student life and faculty and resources and meals are all still available to students. It's a smaller community. I know they did some sunshine packages for students who are on campus. They're far more earlier in the spring that were on campus, but since, you know, the academic year has sort of finished at this point. But the international piece, just like the domestic piece, you know, one of the questions we're asking ourselves this upcoming year is, what does that look like in terms of the recruiting cycle? So for your students who are imagining, you know, what they've seen before ahead of them in terms of, you know, classmates that have visited with colleges that visit their high schools, and they go to visit the colleges and universities that come to visit. We're trying to map that out now to figure out what that might look like. And what are the best ways if we aren't able to travel, and not only might we not be able to travel because of our own sort of state and college policies specifically, but also because high schools may not want to welcome folks from all over the world, understandably, just given the health risks involved. So, so we're actually working on that right now in terms of, you know, how do we reach students? How do they get the opportunity to have access to us as admissions counselors?
Can you take a step back from that? And so I understand what you mean by the travel part, but for people who have a 10th or 11th grader, explain what you mean by that.
Gotcha. So every admissions counselor on any college or university admissions team, they're called territory managers. I call them territory caretakers, honestly, that, you know, so there are admissions counselors that take care of certain geographic territories historically all over the world. And so during a given fall recruitment season, and recruitment season extends beyond the fall, but the one that everybody hears about certainly is visiting with seniors in high school in the fall of their senior year, and visiting with school counseling offices, and, you know, just having a chance to sort of visit with interested students and answer questions. And so recruitment season coming up will not necessarily be physically traveling in some cases. And interestingly, Muhlenberg, like a number of places, has a couple of regional directors that are actually, they are not based on campus. So we have actually a West Coast regional director who's based in Los Angeles, and we have a Southeast coordinator who's actually based in Florida. So again, depending upon what sort of a local situation might be, that will impact. I mean, those folks may be traveling virtually, just like the rest of us, because they may not be able to travel locally as well. So. And
before you became dean, you had that job.
Well, I actually still have a territory. So I still travel to about 75 high schools each fall. Wow. And so, but previous to Muhlenberg hiring a regional director on the West Coast, I was actually the California person. So you should all know that I have a very warm spot in my heart for Californians applying to Muhlenberg. So,
it's true,
you know, absolutely. And I am very well versed in getting to the Philadelphia Newark Airport for those Californians who need to fly out. That's sort of, I have a warm trail from Allentown to those airports specifically. But yeah, so most of us still travel, but there's a team in my case of 11 other admissions counselors that basically will travel from anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks in the fall. And they're visiting high schools, they're interviewing students, they're meeting with school counselors, they're doing evening events in terms of receptions and presentations. So this upcoming fall, for all of you who are about to be seniors, that's going to look a little bit differently than it has from what you might have seen from some of your either older siblings in some cases, or just friends who maybe have just gone through the process or have gone through the process previously.
And one of the things that always strikes me about admission counselors who travel is you guys have this steel trap memory of like every student you meet. So, you know, I fear, you know, because I have to have something to worry about. I fear, I'm Jewish. I got to worry about something, right?
Students have a lot of worries too, I assure you.
So if you and, you know, for the California person, if Becca isn't traveling and meeting students in their high schools, how are our students going to, with Muhlenberg or with any college, going to really connect with the college?
So I'm starting to hear from high schools. I'm starting to get those emails of, you know, this would be typically the time that we'd reach out and schedule an appointment for the fall. And so for some of it, it's, you know, the emails I'm getting are, we're not sure what we're doing. Some of the emails that I'm getting is we're going to host you in a virtual space, but it's going to be different formats. Maybe it's going to be an interactive conversation over Zoom, or maybe it's going to be more of a webinar style, or maybe it's just that we'd rather you reach out individually to students who might be interested and then set up individual appointments. So it's kind of varied. So there'll be the opportunity to connect. The mode of connecting obviously is going to be very different, and the timing potentially might be different as well. Because the other thing too is we're realizing also, because we're experiencing this now too, is we're getting Zoom fatigue, right? And you know, the idea of, you know, for students who are doing remote learning and they're on Zoom for however many hours a day, the idea that they would then step out and sit through a couple hours worth of, you know, sort of interactive opportunities with colleges and universities, you know, maybe every now and then, but doing that consistently day in and day out it's wearing, and it's understandably wearing as humans, right? So, but I think there are other ways to certainly connect, and again, we're trying to be really innovative as educators. I hope we are, right? We're sort of the education business, if you will, if we're not being innovative and using all those tools that we should be to really access and provide access, you know, to students, to not only us as an admissions team, but to the information they need and to members of our community. That's something that you know, that's certainly our responsibility. But there are going to be, interestingly, probably more points of access, I think, through this whole sort of virtual realm this upcoming fall. And there are going to be some colleges and high schools where they'll be able to host and be hosted in person, right? But I think more than anything, at a minimum, it's going to be mostly a hybrid at best, I think, in terms of the experience. So.
A lot of parents and students have expressed a real concern, might not be the right word, but they're anxious about this whole test optional thing. So right before you and I started tonight, I learned that Princeton has announced that they will be test optional. So literally the entire Ivy League, all of these colleges that none of us ever thought would let go of testing have gone test optional. And so, you know, you've been test optional for a billion years ever. So you're sort of
my
laughing.
age, Evelyn. So no.
Sorry, I 20 plus is what we're going with. You have a very solid understanding of how test optional admissions work. So how could you help people who've been sort of going through this, making the assumption that, you know, this is the way we do it, and we take the test, and the higher your test score, the smarter you are, and the higher your test score, the better college you're going to get into. That's kind of how people think.
Sure. So I read today the numeric quantification of how many colleges, four-year colleges and universities are actually either test optional, test flexible, test blind. It's actually over half of the four-year. It's kind of remarkable. It's funny. I knew it was pretty close, but I didn't realize we surpassed it. So I think that's an amazing commentary on and an opportunity, right, for educators in lots of ways to ask ourselves the question of, you know, what place should this hold, if at all, in the college application process and the college selection process, right? So, but we've been test optional actually since 1996. So Muhlenberg has been test optional longer than you've all been alive, which is kind of a startling thing to say about anything. But I think in lots of ways it still holds true, the reasons why we went test optional. And I think that many places are moving towards that. Obviously, in light of the current circumstances, and you know, obviously the limitations and the stress related to access to testing at this point for your class. But I think corely, you know, schools, I think, are focused on real things, and that is, you know, a holistic application review. So colleges and universities that practice holistic application review, even if testing was part of the puzzle before, there are so many other pieces. And quite frankly, a number of them are significantly more important. And without question, even before a school might be test optional, they're still going to attest, and I can't believe there's a colleague that's not going to say anything differently, that the academic record piece is going to be the most important piece. It's not the only piece, to be clear, but without question is the most important. And part of that is it's a four-year overview. And at the point of application, say 3.25, 3.5 year overview, right, of sustained work. Decisions you've made as a student in terms of challenges you've taken, lessons learned in terms of strengths, and areas that you're like, hey, I'm not really that good in this, but you know, I muddled through. And so the holistic piece, you know, becomes even more apparent and more emphasized in lots of ways as a place moves to test optional. But colleges and universities that practice holistic admission to begin with, the shift isn't as dramatic as you might have. In fact, I remember thinking it was going to be hugely dramatic, and it wasn't, because essentially we were doing admissions the same way in terms of whole person admissions. So I think have some confidence in those admissions counselors at places that seemingly are making a radical change from the outside, but really internally are probably not making a wholly radical change in terms of processes, given that if they're practicing holistic admissions, there are lots of different pieces. Right. And even with test scores, when they were part of it, it wasn't the only and not even the most important piece of the puzzle by any stretch.
And they've always said that. They have always said that.
Right.
And they have always said that the transcript carries so much more weight than a test score. So walk us through this. When a file comes in and you're getting ready to read and you see a transcript, what are you looking for?
So the first thing, from a quantifiable, I'm looking at the number of academic majors first. Again, this is just for the baseline stuff. So as we look at coursework, we actually look at academic core courses. We define those at Muhlenberg as, so English or humanities course, writing course, right? Social science or history course is a core. Foreign language, applied sciences, mathematics. Those are 5, and you can have any combination of those, because there is a point at which in a number of schools where there's some elective options where you can double up on science, because all of a sudden you decided, okay, I'm done with foreign language, or I double up on foreign language and I'm done with science. You know, there's some elective options when you become a junior or senior, and so depending upon school district and school. So, but 5 core academic courses in some combination throughout the 4 years. The other piece that I look at is just rigor. What are the choices you've made? You know, and this is the thing. Nobody's expecting anybody to be a perfect product in 9th grade. I think most of us would like to not remember who we were were in our first year of high school on a lot of levels. You know, we're still learning, we're figuring stuff out. We're, you know, it's a whole new adjustment in a lot of ways. And so, you know, the trajectory, the trend of achievement is something that we look at certainly in terms of, well, I should probably back up, sorry. So core courses, rigor of coursework, achievement, and achievement translates to upgrades. Yeah. And it's not just about, did you get an A, but is there a reflection of growth over the course of the number of years in high school, where it's clear that either you've been consistent in certain academic areas, or in other areas you've clearly grown, not only in terms of rigor and achievement. And context is always really important, because the other piece too is not all colleges, or excuse me, not all high schools offer the same kind of opportunities to every student. I know this is crazy to imagine, but there are actual high schools that don't offer AP courses. There are high schools that offer AP and IB courses simultaneously. There are courses there are high schools that offer dual enrollment courses with local colleges and community colleges. And so what we really have to look at as admissions counselors is not what do you have that the other person doesn't at another high school, but rather what choices are you making within the context of the opportunities that are being offered to you at your high school, right? And I think lots of folks automatically assume that there's sort of this cross comparison across all, you know, across all students from one particular high school, but that's not the case. I mean, you know, essentially applicants are sort of swimming in an applicant pool of the entire applicant pool. It's not specifically at one high school. And I think we hear that from a lot of admissions counselors out there, that, you know, just because one student got admitted from your high school doesn't mean that another student wouldn't be specifically.
Wouldn't, exactly. So we get this question a lot. And I feel like people, so if we take away the testing and you tell us that the transcript is the most important, then you've given us something else to fixate on. So we're going to fixate on that.
Okay, sure.
And now we're going to fixate on the number. So is there, you know, isn't a 3.62 GPA better than a 3.58? And should I take the AP this, or should I take the college class?
Yeah. So those quantifiable things, it's never as clear cut, because obviously the context piece, you've got lots of other factors that are influencing that. But that is the most probably frequently asked question of an admissions counselor, right, Evelyn? Should I take the AP course and get a lower grade, whatever that lower grade might be, or the advanced course or the honors course or what have you? Or should I take the college preparatory course, which is still very good, because students are going to, in a rigorous college preparatory curriculum, and get an A without a whole lot of, so the general piece of advice, you know, part of what we're looking at in the academic record, the question we're trying to answer rather as college admissions counselors is a student prepared to achieve in a rigorous college environment, right? And so the GPA alone doesn't tell you that explicitly, right? That's a piece of it in terms of your academic record, but things as I mentioned, like trend, rigor of coursework. And so I really recommend that students ask themselves the question of, you know, what is the most rigorous level of course I could take that I could achieve at without suffering is sort of my qualification there. Because the other piece too is to remember, colleges want to admit students to be part of their community. Those are some of those decisions they're making too. And so while we want you to be able to achieve, being able to achieve does not indicate that you have to have the most APs, the highest GPA. And obviously there are a number of your most selective colleges and universities, right, that is the case. But when you're talking about 90 to 95% of the rest of the four-year colleges and universities in the country, we want students that can achieve, but we also want students to contribute. We want students to be on our athletic teams. We want students to sing in our choirs. We want students to be activists and allies and people that speak out for others and push initiatives on campus and in the community beyond, even in the global universe, right? So to remember too, then it's interesting. I had a conversation with one of my, so I'm the parent of a high school student, and and Evelyn knows this, so he's about to be a junior. So one of his classmates' older sister mom had asked me some advice about college at one point, and the young woman had like 6 APs on her schedule for senior year, and I looked at her and I said, why? and she's like, well, aren't I supposed to? And I said, well, are you really excited about these classes? And I looked at her, I said, you're perfectly capable of achieving well in these courses. My question for you is, at what cost? What are you not getting to do, to enjoy, to experience? You know, and I don't know. And for her, that could have been, you know, it could have been a club, it could have been an activity, it could have been a sport, it could have been just having like real time with friends and family. That stuff really matters.
Sure.
You know, so that was my very long-winded answer of.
No, interesting. And that brought something up in someone who's watching. Her daughter took honors math in 9th and struggled, and had to struggle to bring it up to a B. So and actually a parent of a 10th grader asked me this today, you know, if you start at an honors level or an AP level and it's too hard, and as you said, you know, your grades would actually suffer, do you make the choice to drop down to the lower level? And is that noticeable when you see the transcript 2 years later?
Well, we can see it. It's visibly there, right? Will we focus on it explicitly? If that's a first year in high school situation, I don't know that that's gonna garner a ton of notice. But I think the other piece too is if you're feeling particularly concerned about it, you know, again, a college admissions counselor, and I said, as I talked about, we're caretakers for certain areas of the country and of the world, if you will. And so why not reach out and, you know, have the opportunity to sort of address that. But I think if your achievement thereafter is consistent and solid and not concerning, then I think that that's not even noticeable. And again, we look at the entirety of your academic record, but we're not sort of pinpointing, oh gosh, this happened in 9th grade. Okay, never mind. We're not interested in this person, even though she has since moved on to, you know, obviously very solid academic work overall, right? So,
Right.
Yeah. So it is visible, yes. Whether or not admissions counselors will obsess about that specifically, it's going to vary in terms of selectivity, certainly of the college or the university, but at the same time, again, as I mentioned, none of us want to remember who we were in 9th grade.
I think this is what trips people up, is that they assume that every college in the country is looking for a reason to keep them out, because all we hear about in the media is, you know, the toughies. And, you know, so what's your mindset? That's the opposite of your mindset when you're reading a file.
Yeah, it really is. Well, and this is what's interesting too, if we want to talk about just sort of all the statistics, I think I think I'm pretty close here. I don't know after this year, but of the 2,400 or so, right, 4-year colleges and universities in the country, I think we're talking about maybe 350 colleges and universities that admit less than half of their applicant pools.
Right.
So, and again, that number may be a little old, but it's pretty close. But my point is that you're looking at the vast majority of colleges and universities that actually admit more students than they deny.
Right, vast majority.
Without question. And places people have heard of, and places that are very highly esteemed, right? So again, you know, there's certainly there's this whole rush to sort of that grouping, you know, because those are the places that most people have heard of all over the world. But at the same time, I think to understand too that an admissions process is also going to reflect the philosophy of the community. And I think that's probably going to be helpful too, in terms of, you know, that question of sort of, you know, not only is this a match for me academically, but is this a match for me as a student, as a person, in terms of the community that I'm going to join, right? So,
Okay, so this is an interesting thing that you said, and I want you to talk about it. So you said that people have heard of, and that's definitely a pushback that we get. You know, we always want to help students build a balanced list, and that means we have to put schools on that list where we know you're going to be admitted. Or it's going to be a pretty crappy spring. And as you know, Muhlenberg is not an absolute household name, at least on the West Coast.
Not yet.
However, but you know, help us out. Like, you know, I always tell people, you know, go to, you know, Forbes has a list of the colleges that the, you know, CEOs of the Fortune 500 or 100 graduated from. So, you know, tell us about, you know, who's graduated from Muhlenberg. It's a place that people have heard of. It's just maybe you haven't heard of it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. So the very long-standing history in the sciences. So lots of major researchers in cutting-edge fields in terms of the medical field, but even just in terms of just the pop culture piece. I was actually just in LA last January with the faculty member doing auditions, and we were fortunate enough. So Frankie Grande, who is the brother of Ariana Grande, actually is a Muhlenberg grad, but he himself is a Broadway star. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, no, he's been on Broadway, and actually we got to screen this very interactive, really wild and amazing show that he was in. Interestingly, we had a whole alumni sort of event around it. Richard Benveniste, who was the Watergate lawyer, Barbara Crossett, who's the CNN correspondent, David Fricke, who's a former Rolling Stone writer, Jack McCallum, who's a retired Sports Illustrated writer who's always lived in the Lehigh Valley, and by the way, still teaches at Muhlenberg. So those of you who are interested in sports journalism, you know, one of my former students, although I guess nobody's ever heard of him, but he works pretty high up in the sort of the major music group in the world that owns 90% of the music in the universe, literally. And so lots of folks are moving on and certainly doing things of note. But at the same time, there are lots of people that are just contributing really meaningfully to the world. One of my classmates from Muhlenberg is actually the CEO and founder of Dogfish Head Brewery. And so he's been on the Food Discovery Channel, and but I think they were purchased by Sam Adams recently. So anyway, nonetheless, yeah. So there's a list of other folks, but
you can go to a little liberal arts college that maybe not everyone in your town has heard of, and still lead a perfectly wonderful life and very successful.
Yeah, well, and the other piece too is also know what it means to contribute to a global community and to contribute to a community and to feel responsible for others. And given the time period we're all living in right now, I think that that's more important than ever for many reasons at this point. And so, and I can't remember the name of the book, and you'd think I would remember this right now because it was really interesting, is there's a book that actually talks about sort of all these people you've heard of, major CEOs, people that you've heard of that run all of these sort of Fortune 500 companies, and they all went to colleges that that most folks probably have not heard of. But these are remarkable. Yes, that's exactly it. It's the Frank Bruni book. That's right.
Here, let me whip this off my bookshelf immediately.
Right. The Where You Go is yes.
If you guys have not read this book, you should read it. I love that I could just know exactly where it is. So let's sort of pivot a little bit and let's talk about what reading is going to look like this fall. And I know your primary concern is getting back to campus and But what does it look like if you are a rising senior and you haven't changed your process, you've always been test optional, but our second semester looked entirely different than it used to look. My lacrosse season was canceled, my summer was canceled. So what does that do to the way you're going to read this fall and into spring?
Well, it's funny, we get asked this a lot. The way we're reading isn't wholly different. It's still holistic, it's still contextual. It's recognizing that obviously major pandemic and national unrest aside, right? There are things that are just, we still read the same way. We still read very holistically in terms of the components. The context piece is what's obviously always shifts, and that would shift regardless, but certainly there's some shared experience and unfortunately shared trauma, obviously, in terms of this past spring. So I think some of the questions I get asked very frequently is about, okay, junior year performance, I'm very concerned. And we recognize that. We recognize that there's been a major disruption in terms of people's education this past spring, whether you are in kindergarten all the way, through your, certainly for graduating seniors, right? I just actually sent, we'll be requesting final transcripts from our incoming students very shortly, but sent a note to reassure people that we are recognizing that this past spring was just, tumultuous is sort of the least of dramatic way that I can actually describe it. And so we're going to be reading within the context of that, right? The other piece I have been asked a lot also, interestingly, because I would think the academic piece would be most frequently asked, but very close, probably almost tied for first in terms of the questions we've been asked, is the activities piece.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So as you know, you mentioned, oh gosh, my athletic season was canceled this past spring, or the internship that I had, or the volunteer work, or even this summer specifically.
Right. Yeah.
I had plans, whether it was a program, a trip, a job, and all those things are shifting dramatically. And so again, you know, we're going to read that all in the context. But interestingly, I think, again, innovation, right, in terms of those activity questions that students are asking themselves, and parents are asking what, you know, and I know it's always the question of what looks good on a college application, but I've been really encouraging students to kind of go to the core of why you choose activities to begin with, period. Get rid of all the noise, get rid of all the other sort of piece of things. And, you know, what are you interested in? What do you like? And particularly now, are there things that you just haven't had time to explore that you actually have some interest? You know, this is why there's been all this, like, you know, quarantine cooking and baking going on, right? People are finally
gardening.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, but in lots of ways too, we also recognize, for example, that for some families, students who are about to go through this college process, about to be seniors, they're the eldest sibling in some cases, right? And so when parents have to go back to work and younger siblings are home through this whole sort of spring and this upcoming summer, we recognize that that's a real responsibility, right? Caring for your siblings, helping your family. Maybe there's a sick relative. You know, and when you said yard work, I'm like, go help a neighbor with their yard work. Like that's, I mean, I know that sounds really basic, but those are things that reflect your values to us. They reflect sort of your sense of responsibility to others. And while there might not look sort of glossy and prefabbed in terms of, you know, sort of activities, clubs, and you'll get back to those things, obviously. We'll get back to there, you know, we'll get back to those opportunities. I don't know when, but they will happen at some point. But to really just take this time to sort of focus on the real reasons why you want to be involved in things and what you want to communicate about what you're interested in and what you value, right? So it is going to look differently in terms of the context shift, but the context can shift for any student in any given year, regardless. As you said, there's this shared piece, right? And then the other piece that's sort of part of the reading that's going to be a little bit different this year. In some cases, not all, but we're exclusively a Common App school, and so there is a COVID-19 specific sort of additional base in terms of the impact COVID might have had dramatically on some and others. But again, not appropriate for everybody, but nonetheless, that's going to be an opportunity for students to provide some additional context for us, right, on the admissions side.
Well, that's a really good question, and also another source of anxiety. And actually I saw the coalition came up with a set of questions or a question today, and there was a set of check boxes that preceded the question. And so the anxiety, I'm just going to be really honest, the anxiety on the part of middle class students is, you know, nobody in my family lost their job. I have regular and reliable access to the internet and a computer. I don't have a job because I don't need one. You know, nobody in my family is an essential worker. Nobody got sick. So does that look bad that I didn't have sort of extra hardship because of this?
Well, if that's not your lived experience, that's not your lived experience. You know, I don't think anybody's encouraging anybody to be disingenuous there. But I know when there's a space and you think you should be filling it. I get that.
Right. So what do I say? I'm privileged and I have nothing to report. I mean,
but that's true, right? That's in that, not that specifically that you're saying you're privileged, but that you're reporting back like I have not been impacted in any way as laid out in these particular checks. But again, I think there are opportunities to sort of, again, provide context for all that. But if that's not been your lived experience, I would encourage anybody to feel, and again, I know people feel compelled when there's an empty box there or an empty space. Those are optional. Those are not, I mean, just in terms of rate, it's not in terms of additional statement about if you have been impacted is optional, is not required. I know that, and I remember this just even from high school, like just because it says it's optional doesn't mean that it's not required. Well, I'm telling you in this case, it is not required.
It's really optional.
Yeah. It really is. It really is.
I want to pick your brain on something else that I feel like people are nervous about disclosing, if you will, and that's any kind of mental health situation. So if you have any kind of anxiety or depression or, I mean, like I have students who are just natural extroverts, and this last 3 months have been
stressful.
really stressful for them. is there a way to, is it beneficial to tell you that, or is that something I don't want you to know?
I think that really depends. And I don't think there's a blanket rule there. I think part of that is really a question of the student's individual comfort. And if they really think that that's a really important context piece, I keep kind of going back to the context piece.
Yeah, context.
Does the student feel like that really provides some context in a way that in the absence of sharing that, there might be an assumption made that isn't necessarily correct, or not even correct, accurate is probably the better terminology there, right? So I think that's a choice there. You know, it's interesting because this group, high school students are so used to sort of broadcasting so many things about who they are on social media, and so it's interesting that they ask that when the college application piece comes around, that they ask the question about, you know, should I even divulge X, Y, or Z, and not even in this case. So, but I think it's a personal sort of question in terms of, does that provide critical context? Does the student believe in terms of the entirety of their academic, their application portfolio, right?
So thank you. And I want to wrap up with sort of a bigger picture. I just want to get your thoughts on the liberal arts in general, the future of liberal arts. We talked about this the other day. You know, will the liberal arts survive? We're hearing, you know, a lot of kind of really scary stories about what this whole thing is costing colleges, and some can't, you know, won't be able to afford to make it through.
So I firmly believe that liberal arts will survive. And colleges will survive. Not all of them will, clearly, right? But I think the liberal arts is critical in terms of, again, as we look ahead to the communities that we need to be building at this point, particularly post-pandemic, considering post, or I shouldn't say even, we're not even post, but in terms of just national unrest. And so I think it's critical to be educated and to be educated not only in terms of critical analysis as people, in terms of be able to take in information, to be open to information, and to take it and to analyze and to engage in real dialogue that actually pushes initiatives forward and leads to change, however slow it might be at whatever point in time. But the other piece is just really educating people in terms of what it means to be part of a greater global community. And again, just kind of going back to the sort of same sort of Muhlenberg philosophy in terms of that sense of responsibility that people feel for one another, and how that then, you know, we're sort of this microcosm, but how does that then sort of play itself out? You know, one thing is you're going to find too, and you know, all the data sort of reflects this, is that you know, you're going to find that graduates of liberal arts colleges go on in a number of fields that you wouldn't think they do, probably more regularly and more often than you know students who are educated in terms of, you know, particular sort of whether it's a research university or, you know, sort of a different environment. I think education in general, I'm a proponent, period. I certainly am biased as it comes to sort of the value of what the liberal arts piece of things are, but I think those are real questions, right? So I believe it will survive. I think certainly there are some colleges that are not going to survive the pandemic specifically, and part of that is also because there may be some difficulties prior to even arriving to this for a number of those places, and so this is just sort of the last very, very, very large sort of thing that really sort of that in some cases may, you know, shutter some colleges out there. But education is going to live on. It needs to, you know, it needs to, just in terms of just, you know, civilization and community. Maybe that's me being the idealist, but I guess, that's what happens when you're an educator for all these many years, that you really
exactly. You can't help yourself.
And
what sort of like nugget of advice, like, did you give your son's friend's mom, and what nugget of advice would you give to moms of rising seniors right now?
Well, it's interesting because I'm experiencing now, so my oldest son is about to be a junior. I'm not currently in the search with him, my husband is. So I decided that I've ushered tens of thousands of students through the process. I'm going to come in at the end, but really want them to have this time together. I think that was part of my thinking, is just that it's really fleeting. you know, and I think as parents, you recognize this, that you think of those days when you're up all night and you think, when will this ever end? And then all of a sudden you're here and your child's about to embark on their life and go to college, right? If you know, if you're fortunate to be in that position. And so I think for me, even just the college process piece for the student and for their parents, to really take in the time and not be rushing through it to get to the end, you know. And I think lots of folks are anxious to be like, I want to know what's going to happen. I want to know where I'm going to land. I want this all to be over. But once it's over, you know, the family dynamic is wonderful, but it changes, right? It's wonderful and that it's really exciting that students are moving on to college. And so I always say, just really cherish the time in terms of this college process that you're having together, because it's probably one of the first times as parents. And I think you can appreciate this, parents who are listening, that you actually get some undivided attention from your from your child. They also from you. There and maybe it's not going to look the same this upcoming fall for you. So it's not going to be the car rides to college campuses. Maybe it will in some cases on a limited basis, but maybe it's the sitting down and actually talking and reflecting, and looking at virtual tours together, attending webinars for now, and hopefully next spring visiting some places in person, right? But to really just take that in and realize that it goes by pretty quickly. So for both the student and the parents, just, you know, look at this college process. As much as you're all stressed and anxious, it's a really wonderful time that you actually get. It's like built-in time together that later on, once, you know, students go to college, that really changes. So
yeah, and I would just add, it's a really great time to celebrate your child for who they are. And you know, so many parents sort of, they put their own desires on top of the kids, and the kids have to carry that. And if you can just find a way to refrain from doing that and celebrate them for who they are, and put their desires at the forefront, you know, then wherever they end up going to college will be the perfect place for them.
That's right. That's agreed. Well, and my goal in life is to raise good people. And so my thinking, and I've observed this very directly, is that if you land in the right place, surrounded by the right people, that happens. You know, and so that's why I think college search and college choice is so important. There are multiple places that can happen for each student. Clearly, there's not just one, to be clear.
That's right.
And so, but you know, I've kept that. I think everybody imagines that I'm going to be this crazy sort of college searcher with my sons, and it all works out. It really does.
Well, and I love what you just said about raising good people. So you've raised 2 at home and several thousand each year at school in your job. And I would just say, as a personal testimonial, I had a client a number of years ago. It's obviously been more than 5 years now, but he had Muhlenberg on his list. It was not at the top of his mom's list, I will tell you. I asked him to consider it. And they made a trip. Yeah, they made a trip, and I called Melissa and said, "Hey, Gabe's going to be on campus. Can you watch out for him, and can you introduce him to Jesse, because I met Jesse when I was on campus, and I think they'd like each other." And Gabe and Jesse ended up in the same fraternity.
They were friends. I know. We had a nice little match there.
And that's the thing. Muhlenberg is that personal of a place that you can literally meet a human being on your tour, and then months and months later, 6 months later, connect, you know, a student with that tour guide. So it's a wonderful place.
Thanks, and I appreciate that.
I put it on a lot of lists. It's truly one of the best and the most. I consider the liberal arts colleges the place where you wrap your arms around them and you hug them through 4 years.
Right.
And Melissa really does that. And from what I hear, she throws a really good Seder. She has all the Jewish kids over to her house.
I do Thanksgiving too, just so you know. Yes, we've had. Yeah, every year my kids are food coming this year.
And you do drive them to the airport.
We do. The minivan's been very handy that way. It's really worked out well. So, but it reminded me now, I'm going to text Gabe after this, because I'm like, oh.
Tell him I say hi.
I will. That sounds great.
Thank you, Melissa. It's been really great having you and
having me.
Getting, you know, real information from, you know, we always assume like we put these applications in and it just goes into a black hole, and we don't really know who the person is or the people are.
They're real people there, I promise you.
You're real people looking for real people on your campus.
Right. That is all too true. All too true. So. Well,
I hope this has been really helpful, everybody. And as you know, we'll be back next week, Thursday, 5:30 Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.